Let's say good morning to Baroness Claire Fox, independent peer and director at the Academy of Ideas. Morning, Claire.
Good morning, Duncan.
Pleasure to see you, and thank you for your time this morning. Before we get into your reaction to some of the news stories we're chewing over this morning, and also get your view on security for politicians and MPs, you served with Anne Widdecombe, didn't you, as a Brexit MEP? Would you be kind enough just to give us maybe a personal view on what she was like as a person?
Yeah, I mean, I've just written something about it, so I won't rehearse everything. But the thing that was a surprise to both of us was that we got on. I mean, we were on completely different sides of the political spectrum. I was, let's be honest, rather frightened of her initially, and I had this kind of caricatured view of her. You know, can you imagine? She was a shadow Conservative Home Secretary, you know, hardcore in lots of ways. And there was me, kind of lefty liberal type. And I think that we just assumed it would not be a match made in heaven. Actually, we became great friends during that time. And I learned a lot from her. I also developed a huge amount of respect for her. And I think there was a bit of a kind of jokey mutual admiration that went on. So it was very nice. Just give one example. You know, she was sort of a, you know, lock 'em up and throw away the key, you might think. She was associated with being very hardline on prisons, and I'm a bit of a prison reformer type. So I was immediately wary. Of course, when I spoke to her beyond a soundbite, I discovered that she was hugely committed to, for example, education within prisons. She felt that locking people up without productive activity was disastrous. She believed that people should stay in prison for the length of time they were given.
Yeah.
She was hardline in that way. But whilst they were in prison, she wanted to have the possibility of rehabilitation. And so guess what? We agreed, despite everything. So it was very nice to discover, to learn a lesson that you should move beyond the caricatures.
Your story, and thank you for sharing it with us, nicely sums up where I think we have a difference these days. You are very different politically in a lot of your views, put Brexit to one side, possibly united over Brexit. But it seemed to me that Anne Widdecombe was one of those politicians, and there have been others in the past who are sadly no longer with us, who was able to go, OK, well, that's your point of view. I disagree with it massively. Don't like what you say, but I respect your right to say it. Let's go and have a drink in the bar. And we seem to have lost that, I think, that particular trait in today's politics, where it seems to be very, well, I don't like you because of your views. And then that extends, sadly, into areas of possibly, I think, therefore, because I don't like your views, I can verbally abuse you, and it goes further. Do you think that's a fair comment?
I do, although I think there may be some precise reasons for that. I mean, on the one hand, we've had the emergence of identity politics, in which particularly young people are socialized into believing that they are their identity. And therefore, when they speak as their identity, that they believe that their beliefs are them in a way that's so personal that they take things with a very kind of thin-skinned approach. And you'll find that. The other thing that's happened, of course, which it more relates to the particular issue that Anne and I were involved in, is that politics and political lines around left and right have really collapsed. We're into a new political phase, but we haven't quite arrived there. In other words, the traditional legacy parties have lost in many ways their base, their social standing in society, and new forces are emerging. And Anne and I, in a way, represented, as MEPs, we were the kind of people who came together across left and right because we wanted to demonstrate the ability to change politics for good around having a more democratic society outside the EU without getting into the detail of that. That was what we assumed, that there would be a big political realignment. And we've come to realize that that is not going to be accepted easily by those people in positions of power. And so consequently, there is an actual active attempt at mobilizing against. It's kind of like trying to treat anyone with this new kind of political outlook as though we're kind of some kind of pariahs, you know, the deplorables, the gammon, and populism, because that's the label it's given it, is put into a kind of quarantine, into a force field, and kind of, don't go there. And that therefore has the impact of particularly demonising people with a political outlook that has become toxic and unpleasant. And we saw that happen in 2016, starting then around the Brexit referendum. It's not about Brexit so much as about the moving on from the old way of doing things to a new way. And I want to get to the new way working through.
Given that demonisation that you mentioned of politics or certain politicians who have views that someone may disagree with, where does that lead you when it comes to the security around MPs and politicians? I mean, one of the things we're chewing over this morning is this issue about donations to Reform UK and political parties. Should they not be capped, or should they be capped? That gets us into what we know is the current case with Reform UK MPs at the moment having 24-hour security that the party is paying for. We've been chewing over this morning on Talk whether or not the time has come to actually give all MPs 24-hour security, and as taxpayers we should pick up the tab. Do you think it's come to that?
You see, I'm much more ambivalent than the conversation you've been having up until now. I mean, I think that in a democracy, it's very difficult to treat politicians, all politicians, as though they need protection from the public. Think about what that means in a democratic society. It sets the public up as the problem, and the politicians have to be given particular privileges. And I worry about that in terms of its implications. And in fact, I mean, it's very presumptuous, but that wasn't kind of Anne's approach to politics, by the way. I mean, she kind of like herself, she took precautions, of course, but she wanted to be out there with the people. Yeah. And I think there will be exceptions. I mean, I heard somebody say, you might need to do risk assessments. Not every politician is the subject of public ire. And also, I want the police to do their job at protecting the public at the moment. I'm worried about giving them an extra job. I mean, you just end up in this situation where you think, oh my God, one of the things that's broken down in terms of the social contract is we no longer believe that necessarily the police have got our back. There's a kind of ambivalence. That's what the whole discussion on two-tier policing is. And that we feel as though the police are not able to deal with the kind of crimes that are blighting people's lives, and that when we get into trouble and we phone the police, they won't turn up. So then to kind of make the whole focus of this conversation police protection of politicians feels skewed to me. And you mentioned David Amos earlier, and he very famously, and of course because of the brutal murder by an Islamist that subsequently occurred, you might say I'm wrong on this, but he did not want particular protection of MPs in their surgeries. He wanted surgeries to carry on. The other thing that I think happens, and I was listening into your conversation here, is you then get into this conflation of physical threat and verbal threat. Mm-hmm. Now, as a big free speecher, I'm very anxious about that. There is some vile, sewer-like viciousness on social media. We know that. But I absolutely say that we should not conflate language and words with action, because I can tell you who that will be weaponized against, by the way. Yeah. And even when Philip Kisley, who I'm a great fan of, was saying, well, this steps over the line into hatred, that's the basis on which the government are, as we speak, legislating against hate speech.
You make a really, really good point. I mean, where is the line then? Where would you draw the line?
I'm not very good on lines. I mean, I'm very determined that we defend free speech. Yeah. I think anything can be called hate speech if it suits them. And in fact, we're seeing, as we speak, serious attempts by legislators and the government to criminalise, demonise, and, ultimately make sanctions for speech which they consider to be hateful and harmful. And they actually would make no distinction. Very often legislation that I'm arguing against in the House of Lords, they're sort of saying, if that post goes up, it's the same as if you burnt the hostel, if you said something, you're familiar with all that. I think we have to be extremely cautious about okaying that because somebody that we love or care about is the victim of violence, to say, and the one thing we definitely don't know is we've no idea what the motives are behind the murder of Anne Widdecombe. And immediately something terrible happens, and this happened with David Amos and Joe Cox. They said, "Oh, what we should do is bring in a law to ban online hate speech." Right? Or, well, we don't want to do exactly the same thing. That would be wrong. Just on your question about, which I didn't say, about donations to reform. I think that's. I mean, I can't stress to you enough that it seems to me that the whole discussion around capping donations and all the rest of it is the use of a kind of form of lawfare against the rise of a new populist party. I mean, it's a sort of desperate bid to rein in the possibility of Reform establishing itself as a new party. Now, I'm not a member of Reform, and I'm not making an argument, by the way, that there's nothing to answer in terms of Nigel Farage and the donations. I mean, I think that's a reasonable set of questions, and I'm not arguing journalists shouldn't ask them or pursue this issue. But bringing in legislation that says you can't give more than this much money and trying to imply that all the money is coming from dodgy foreign donors and so on is a way of trying to delegitimize and undermine the rise of a new movement. And they can't do that politically, because they're kind of broken, hollowed out old parties. And so they try and do it in this way of discrediting those parties.
Yeah, I think that's a more than fair comment. Listen, I just want to get your take on where we find ourselves with our next Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, who, in my book, doesn't have a mandate. The Conservatives have written to the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, saying, look, we really need to talk to this bloke, have him in the chamber before he becomes Prime Minister. He's massively avoided any form of scrutiny. I find it staggering that, apart from the odd video on X of him getting off a train at Manchester saying, oh, I'm back in Manchester, the Holy Land, you know, we don't seem to get a great deal from the man who's going to be our next Prime Minister that none of us had any say over. Should he have to go in the chamber of the House of Commons before summer recess and actually answer some questions from MPs?
Well, actually, I've only discovered through this discussion that the Commons gets their recess a week before the Lords do. So I could be outraged. We're there for an extra. Anyway, that's hardly to complain about. The emergence of Burnham as the Prime Minister is, you know, very much a coup, isn't it?
It is a coup.
Where, you know, whatever one thinks about Nigel Farage calling that by-election in Clacton, why on earth was there a by-election in Makerfield, right? And the truth of the matter is, it was to resolve the problem of an internal problem for the Labour Party.
Yeah.
It was motivated, by the rise of Reform in local elections. It was entirely contrived to, as I say, contain these new forces. And as a consequence, it's extraordinary to me that we're about to have this Prime Minister based on a contrived by-election where the MP didn't need to stand down but did to resolve this issue. And we have no way of holding Andy Burnham to account. So I'm absolutely sympathetic to journalists who say Nigel Farage won't answer questions, why won't he? But I tell you who's a bit more powerful than Nigel Farage at the moment, and that is the person who's about to be anointed the Prime Minister. Yeah. And he won't answer questions either. And he's kind of very contrived about how he does it. So whether he should be doing it in the House or not, I think the general problem is, for us, that we're trying to guess what he might do as the public. Voters don't know what the tax rates will be or if there will be any. We're not sure what's going to happen about immigration and about indefinite right to remain in terms of the Boris wave and so on. We're trying to pick up and read the runes, aren't we, in newspapers? Because we just do not know.
We don't know, and we shouldn't be in a position where we have to try and pick up on bits and pieces. Listen, Claire, always a pleasure. Thank you. Baroness Claire Fox, independent peer and director of the Academy of Ideas.